Welcome to Pretty Lies and Alibis. Let's seek the truth and travel the long road to justice together. What you know, Alibis, happy Friday again. It's Friday night. I've kind of been switching between the Wagner trial and keeping up with our beach house and waiting on things to develop up here with Ian. So I'm just now getting to this, but it's been a good day. A lot of you have asked about our house. And so here's a picture of the storm surge. We have some friends down there staying right now. So they've kept us up to date all day, other than just like a couple of shingles missing and some cleanup underneath the stilts. I think we fared pretty well compared to the poor people in Florida. So I think Charleston got hit pretty hard. There was a lot of flooding in Myrtle Beach. We just got lucky where we were, as close as we are to the water, that we didn't get any more. So, all right. Out of the gate, big thanks to Debbie B for the donation. I appreciate you, lady. And big thank you to the new Patreon perks subscribers. Seems like it's growing every day so far, and I'm really excited about it. So, just a reminder, if you haven't been listening, nothing changes. If you don't subscribe, this is just a perk thing. The top tier, you get like a free t-shirt and some lives. The middle tier, get some lives and live chats. And then the lowest tier, you get a live chat once a month. And then all of them get ad-free episodes and little things like that. So, but if you don't subscribe, you don't miss any content at all. All right. Song fact of the day. I've been singing this for a day solid because of the storm. The Thunder Rolls by Garth Brooks. I've seen him probably 4 times live, and every time he does this song, the crowd goes nuts. So when this song was released, both TNN and CMT banned the video, with a CMT representative saying that the network was in the business to entertain and not to promote or condone violence or social issues, because the video revolves around, and the song revolves around, a cheating husband who is also a domestic abuser. And VH1, which aired Pop-Up Video, which I'd give anything if they would bring that show back. That was my favorite music show besides Rock and Roll Jeopardy. They began playing it, and women's shelters thanked them and the record company for raising awareness of domestic violence. On October 2nd, 1991, the clip was awarded the CMA Video of the Year award. And this song actually has an extra verse that was left out of the album version. And he only does it at live performances. I'm telling you, your chest would rattle with the roar of the crowd, because it gets a little darker because the woman goes in the back bedroom to get a gun to kill her cheating and abusive husband. But to make the song commercially available, they left that third verse out. I'm going to tweet out the live performance with the third verse because I love it. So they started out the day in the Wagner trial by saying the juror who has been sick has been replaced with an alternate juror. And the witness, the witnesses has been interesting, because if you notice, pretty much every Manley or Rhoden family member opts into being recorded, while we've had officials who are tax paid opt out, which speaks volumes to me in a million ways. But hats off to these people. It was a very emotional day of testimony. It was all family. And so we started off with April Manley. She's married to James Manley, which is Dana's brother. And Dana worked in the medical field since her senior year in high school. She worked at a nursing home for many, many years. And they found out after her murder that Dana had a dealer's license for cars. She says Frankie was 20 when he was killed, and her son and Frankie are 2 weeks apart and worked together at the time of his murder. And it seems like they were pretty inseparable. Frankie and Hannah Hazel lived with his dad prior to getting the trailer with Hannah Hazel after Dana moved out. As you know, Dana lived there with Frankie, Little Chris, and Hannah Mae before she got this new place, just about a month before they were all murdered. April was at the hospital when Hannah Mae gave birth to her youngest. Dana, Corey, and her mother-in-law were there also, Corey being her boyfriend at the time of her murder. He testified today. Man, I just want to give all these people a big hug because they just seem so sweet. They seem like big sweethearts. And if you think about what these people have lost and what half of these people saw with their own two eyes, they will never have a normal day again in their whole life. I don't think there'll ever be a day they don't think about that terrible day. And it's bad enough to lose one person, but to lose 8 in one day, it's something I think about every day I'm watching this trial, just the enormity of it. So she also said that Hannah Mae worked at a place called Edgewood as a nursing assistant. Dana would stop every day on her way to work to check on her mom and dad. And she said that her husband, James, and Dana had an unbreakable bond. Her son was trying to get in touch with Frankie the morning everybody was murdered because he rode to work with her son, Cody, and he hadn't shown up. So her husband comes in and said Dana was dead. And so she went with him back to Dana's, and she said James was obviously just a wreck emotionally. By the way, here is April Manley on the stand. She was emotional at times and very, her and her son Cody both were, very soft spoken. James had told April he heard baby Kylie, who was 5 days old, crying, but he couldn't go in there. He said he knew what kind of mother Hannah Mae was, and she would not be letting Kylie cry like that. So he knew the same fate had gotten her. When they got to Dana's, they stood at the bottom of the driveway with Brentley, which is Frankie's oldest son, and they were waiting for the cops to come by so they could flag them down. They had already talked to one cop on her mom's at her mom's house who was already at Frankie's. The first officer stops when they waved them down, and then EMS came right after. The police asked who all should be there at Dana's, and they went in and checked. So they told them, Hannah Mae, little Chris, Dana. They couldn't find little Chris at first, which I don't understand because he was laying on his bed. And I've always heard that. And if you know different, let me know in the comments. And maybe this is something that'll be cleared up at a later time when an investigator testifies. But I know for a while they didn't see little Chris. And there was suspicion out there that maybe little Chris had done this because they couldn't find him. Poor thing was in his bed, just dead. It's terrible. So the police, they went in and checked, and then they couldn't find him. So the police asked for April to draw kind of a layout of the house so they would know where to look. All the time she was there, they did not find little Chris, and she found out when she was at the hospital with the new baby that they had found him, but his car wasn't there. Now, this kind of explains maybe the series of texts between Dana, little Chris, and Chris Sr. right before the murders. They found out later that Chris Sr., remember, he had broken curfew, so he was in trouble. He had taken the tires off of little Chris's car and hid the lug nuts. So poor thing, he was probably like going between both parents. Please, 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 let me have my car back. So they took Kylie from the house, and an officer brought her out to an EMT. She asked if she could hold the baby, and they said no, not until they got evidence off of her, which would have been her clothing. And later at the hospital, she got to hold her, and she stayed with Kylie at the hospital for a little while. So at the hospital, they put baby Kylie in a room. Eventually, they make April leave. So some family congregated at the hospital, and guess who shows up? None other than Mr. Jake Wagner, the very man who was part of murdering all these people, and in fact, murdered the entire household that was Dana's. So she noticed his hair was extremely dark compared to normal. If you watched last night, his hat is on the table. That is not any kind of a hat on his head. That's how dark his hair was. Jake was emotionless. She said he was not worried about anything, not acting like he had just lost someone he claimed to love. He came to check on Kylie and see if he could take her home with him. She told him he couldn't. And so he hugged her, and she gets really emotional when she talks about Jake hugging her. And he was there for maybe 10 or 15 minutes. And when she tried to go back inside to be with Kylie, they told her she had to leave. And then around this time, Child Services shows up with Ruger, who is Frankie and Hannah Hazel's youngest son, that was laying in between them when they were murdered. So when April got to the church, she found out that Kenneth had also been murdered as well. She did go to everyone's funeral but Gary's. That was held in Kentucky. And by the way, photo credits down on the bottom. So if you look here, I'll share these link in the description for these pictures for the episode. There are some pictures of Billy, George, and Jake attending Gary Rhoden's funeral in Kentucky. And if you look on that top picture, you may have to zoom in. Billy has a mark on his face. And somebody mentions that in just a bit, but it's just so crazy to see them at Gary's funeral knowing what they did. Billy was the one that killed Gary and drug his and Chris Sr.'s body through that house. I mean, these people have no soul. It's a different kind of evil to kill a whole family and then to show up at their funerals. I guess part of that is just to keep the suspicion off of you, because I guess the average person would think, well, if you did it, you probably wouldn't go to the funeral, but still, man, karma bus. I hope it hits all of them. So Chris, Kenneth, Dana, and the kids had a joint funeral. Hannah Hazel had one by herself, and then we know Gary's was in Kentucky. She said that Billy Wagner was there and he had bruises on his face, and Jake was also there. I think maybe Chris or Gary or both might have got a couple of shots in on him before, punched him in the face or something in a struggle, because we know they were the only ones that seemed to be out of bed at the time they were murdered. And hopefully they got one in on him before he murdered them. April was later interviewed by BCI as the months kind of progressed, and she gave her DNA and her phones to them. So going back, she said she helped Dana move in. They had a baby shower for Hannah Mae at the new house, but April wasn't able to attend that. And baby Kylie was born on April 17th. Now remember, her mom's murdered on the 22nd, just 5 days. So in the weeks leading up to the murder, she had been at the house the Wednesday before. And Dana had called and asked for her and her son Cody to bring a drill. There was something about the door. The kids were swinging on something and it broke. Her son Cody was there, as well as little Chris, Dana, and a friend Dana had worked with. Before she left, Jake had come in and Sophia was there at the time. So this is, just a week or less before the murders. Hannah Mae had told April that Jake was there to set that crib up that had been Sophia's that she wanted to use for her new baby. And she had asked him several times before the baby was born to come and set it up for her, but he didn't. So I think maybe, wanting to get the layout since they were settled in that house good and to see where everything was placed. I'm sure in the weeks before that, there was stuff everywhere. So I'm sure he was taking mental notes of where things were, because it was probably going to be dark in there. So Hannah Mae, she knew Jake and knew of the other Wagners. And she said growing up, the Wagner family owned all of the property around them. She said Jake would spend the night with Hannah Mae when they were living at the old trailer, which is where Frankie and Hannah Hazel were murdered. So that's where Dana, little Chris, and Hannah Mae lived until they got this new place about a month before the murder. She saw Billy with Chris Sr. before. He came to the hospital with Kenneth, actually, when Chris Sr. got beaten with a 2x4. If you remember, one of the reasons Jake said that Kenneth was murdered is because he retaliated for Chris Sr. with this beating, and I think they were afraid maybe he would retaliate against them. She said Billy stood out to her because he was scary looking, and also he was wearing a gun on the side of his belt in a holster. This was at the time Chris Sr. was beaten with the 2x4. So Billy and Kenneth were talking about seeking revenge on who had hurt Chris Sr. And Hannah Mae had also been in a car accident, like she was rear-ended or somebody she rear-ended somebody or somebody rear-ended her. It was never made clear. And Billy showed up on the scene when that accident happened with Hannah Mae. She saw George and Angela a couple of times over the years at birthday parties for Sophia, which were always at the Wagner's house on Peterson Road. Remember, the other house they lived in before that burned down. Probably arson or something where they got the insurance money, I think. She saw George, let's see, she didn't interact with Jake much. They didn't really like each other, she said. Jake said to Hannah Mae that April was nosy when she would defend Hannah Mae. And they were at her house once when Jake and Hannah Mae had an argument, and Jake said that he had bought everything for Sophia. She was still pregnant at this time, and he said he would take it all and she would have nothing. We really, in the testimony with the family, get to start seeing that pattern of abuse and controlling nature with Jake and Hannah Mae, and it was bad. So Hannah Mae left, and at this point, she's a very new driver. And she called April and said that Jake was chasing her at very high speeds. So April told her to try and get away from him if she could. So Hannah Mae finally hid behind a church on Union Hill Road. So April called Dana, who then called Chris Sr. April called Hannah Mae back and stayed on the phone with her until her dad got there. Another time, Chris had to go get Hannah Mae when she left the Wagner's house as well. April said Jake was very controlling over Hannah, and the family wasn't allowed to do things with Sophia, like take her trick-or-treating or do any kind of little things like that. She said that Hannah Mae was always what she called a chunky little monkey, and after she had Sophia, she lost so much weight because Jake would tell her that she was fat and would tell her not to eat. Hannah told April she was scared of Jake and that she was afraid of the entire Wagner family. Now, I will say, throughout today, there were a lot of objections by the defense. A lot. It was kind of consistent the whole day. So the day they moved into their new place where they were murdered, April was there helping because a tree had fallen in that yard. There was an objection and then a sidebar. Then a series of objections that were sustained. So we never really figured out where she was going with that. She picked Hannah Mae up from a graveyard parking lot across from the Wagner's home one time as well. April had been to the fireworks display that Chris Sr. had every 4th, and the prosecution said that Chris Sr. had a fireworks dealer license. She doesn't really remember if any of the Wagners were at those. She did not know of the marijuana grows at Chris Sr.'s house, and she said she had not been to Kenneth's property in probably about 10 years. And she did not know that they were doing the chicken fighting. She lists Frankie's best friends, and there was a bunch of them, and she includes her son Cody, and they were always with Frankie. So the locks on Frankie's trailer, as we know, were newer. They replaced them shortly before Dana moved out because Brentley had got out and went over to Chris Sr.'s, who he called Papa. And Chris went and told them all off because the baby got out while they were sleeping. So that's where they put that chain lock up high where he couldn't reach it. Hannah Mae was closest with Kendra Rhoden, who is her cousin. That is Kenneth's daughter. Kendra testified today, and she just seems like a big sweetheart. When Hannah Mae was pregnant, April knew Charlie Gilly the second time. She knew Charlie Gilly was the dad, and Hannah Mae never said it was anybody else's or thought it was anybody else's. After the murders, April tried to see Sophia. She called Jake and asked to bring her to her oldest son's wedding. Sophia and Jake did show up, but it was at the very end of the reception. And she said they were trying to keep Sophia in their lives like any normal family who lost so many would. That's, at that point, she's one of the few living descendants of that entire Rhoden family. So she saw her once more at Brentley's birthday party, which is Frankie's oldest son. She took Sophia gifts one time to the Wagner house. They weren't allowed to come in past the foyer area. Between the murders and the arrest, she said she saw Sophia around 3 times. Her mother and father-in-law tried to get him to let them see Sophia, but eventually they finally just stopped trying. So that would be Dana's parents, Hannah Mae's grandparents. So this would have been their great-granddaughter. April 22nd, the day she went to Dana's, she never went inside there or any of the other crime scenes for that matter. And on cross, Nash was up doing the cross today, and I'm going to tell you guys, if there's one thing that I don't like a defense attorney doing, I understand they have to be aggressive for their client, but when you badger witnesses, or I don't even want to say badger, it's not that he was badgering. He was very condescending, and my blood pressure got up a few times because you're dealing with people who have no ties to these murders other than the fact these were their loved ones. He was so rude to them, and I really just yeah. So so he starts off, we have certain rules. I would like you to not tell me what someone told you. If I catch you nodding your head, I will ask you to say out loud your question. And this is the bald guy. This is not the older guy. This is the younger bald guy who always looks ticked off. April 21st and 22nd, you were sick, you had bronchitis, and you slept in the living room in the recliner, and you have a cell phone. And she said, yes. Then Nash says, you said your husband is a logger. He didn't go to work because of the rain that night. She says, yes. He says, you've been interviewed by BCI agents several times. You've been questioned about texts from Jake Wagner the morning of the murders at around 3:30 a.m. on the 22nd. You didn't have the cell phone. And she said, I didn't have that phone. The defense says there were texts with others, Chad Burns, and she says, that's my husband's best friend. So he says, you didn't receive the text from Jake, and she said no. The defense said, we talked about where Dana lived before she moved, where Frankie and Hannah Hazel lived. And she said, yeah, they had lived there for years before they moved, and she had visited Dana there very often. They all lived in close proximity. So it seems like everybody was always over at somebody's house. That's how it is with me and my family. We all live right here within 30 feet of each other. So we all keep an eye out for each other, and we're always visiting and just walk in. So I get that. And it's really cool when you have a family that can do that. So Chris Sr. lived next door to, the defense says Chris Sr. lived next door to Frankie and Hannah Hazel. You're aware that Dana had been in the new location for 30 days, and Chris Sr. spent $30,000 cash. So she says, I know it was a high amount, but I don't know the amount. The defense says, I can refresh your memory from an interview with a BCI agent if you'd like. Are you aware of the purchase price, or was it relayed to you? And he said, I asked you 30,000 cash, and she said she said she didn't know the cash amount. It's been a while. You got to realize it's been over 6 years since these murders happened. And they're, I know that they get refreshed when they're talking to the prosecution about what questions may come up and things like that. But you kind of combine the trauma of what happened and what they continue to have trauma from to this day with just a time that probably is a big blur. And then you've got some defense attorney being a jerk to you. I'm going to tell you right now, I ended up at the pokey because I might have went for the dude. The defense says you and your husband split, and James had gotten into some legal trouble, and Chris Sr. gave him $5,000 to help him with the expenses with that. Would you remember giving that information to a BCI agent? And she said, what are you getting to? Can you explain? And then he says, you says Chris Sr. had been beaten by a 2x4. Do you know the circumstances? And she said no. And then he said, on the morning of the 22nd, you rode in the ambulance with Kylie. She says yes. The defense says, Jake showed up. Explain that to me. What was his appearance? And she said he came up to where we family were standing. And the defense says, was Jake wanting to take Kylie? And she said he thought Kylie was his. And the defense says, you said he was emotionless? And she said yes. The defense asked, how long did Jake stay talking? And she said not long, maybe 15 to 20 minutes. The defense says there was nothing in that conversation that caused you to contact BCI. She says no. The defense says, and now he was involved, but at the time he didn't cause any alarms as to how he was acting. And she said, at the time I wasn't paying attention to him. The defense says, you said Jake chased Hannah Mae. There was an argument. And she said, yes, in my house. The defense says, how often would Frankie come to your home? And she said, about every day. The defense asked, did you visit his home? I'm curious about the extent of contact with him. And she said, some. The defense says, you were close to Hannah Mae. And she said, yes. The defense says she was also dating Corey Holdren. The defense says, you were communicating to Jake about seeing Sophia? She says, yes, I messaged him a couple of times. And then he goes back to Hannah Mae when she needed to be picked up. How did you know she needed to be picked up? And April said, because she called me. The defense says, and you met at the end of the driveway? And she said, yes, that driveway was very rough to go up. The defense says, has she ever called you before that? And April said, no. Nash said, do you know if she called from a cell or a landline? And April said, I don't know. And the defense asked, what was Frankie's hobbies? And it was derby, demolition, and hunting. I don't know what they're getting to, but the hunting seems to be a common theme that they're bringing up with everybody when they're questioning about Frankie. So maybe we'll get to that on their side of the case. On redirect, the prosecutor says, did Chris Sr. give you money to pay for your mom's funeral? And she said, yes. Prosecutor said, you said Jake didn't ask about Hannah Mae. He was only asking about Kylie and not showing emotions. And she said, yes. And the prosecutor asked, you shared that information with BCI? And she said, yes. Prosecutor said, you said Chad Burns is your husband's best friend. Is he dead now? And she said, yes, he was killed in a car accident. So the prosecutor says, before the homicides, did you have Jake's number? She said no, but after, she did. Then she's asked, Jake and George were at the funerals. Did you see Billy or Angela? And April said no. The prosecutor said, did your sons go hunting with Frankie? And she said Gregory may have a couple of times. That's her other son. We haven't heard from Gregory yet. Not sure if we will. The prosecutor says, did you share with BCI why it bothered you that Jake hugged you that day? And she started crying. And this was very emotional and profound for me. She said, he still had my baby's blood on him and he was touching me. And her baby, meaning Hannah, she was protective over Hannah. So the next witness we get to is Cody Manley, who is James Manley and April Manley's son. He's the one that Frankie rode to every day to work with. And him and Frankie would go squirrel hunting sometimes. They would work on derby cars. He would work the derby events as a volunteer fireman, and Frankie didn't smoke or drink. They asked that question. He knew Frankie had fighting chickens, but Cody never messed with any of that, and he never went with Frankie to any of those fights. He's asked about Chelsea, which is Frankie's ex, and he said they were together a long time. He knew of the Wagners. He knew Jake and Billy. Had never met George, but did meet Angela. He had seen George a few times at different places, and he had been to their home at Bethel Hill. That's the one I believe that burned down. He was there to take Hannah Mae when she was dating Jake, but at that point she had not gotten pregnant with Sophia. And he stayed there for a couple of hours. Hannah Mae wasn't old enough to drive at the time, by the way. She was 14. He would see Jake and Billy at Chris Sr.'s house sometimes, and he went to church functions sometimes. These things called a lock-in, where like you spend the night in the church with like a teen group, the youth group or whatever. And at that lock-in, Jake and Hannah Mae were there. He went to the fireworks party at Chris Sr.'s. He did see Jake and Billy there. He saw George there once or twice, but did not interact with him. He said that Jake and Hannah Mae had dated for 5 years or longer, and he would see Jake and would be at the homes on Union Hill Road because, just going between all the homes back when things were good. He knows that once Hannah Mae was at their house and Jake showed up and they were arguing, Jake was angry and Hannah Mae told him to leave her alone. So then he also recalls the incident where Jake got in his truck and chased her. They called Chris Sr. to come get her after she hid. So the day before the murders, he went to Frankie's and was helping him fix some wiring on those chicken cages. He was there for a couple of hours and left around the time it was getting dark. And when he was there, it was Frankie, Hannah Hazel, and Ruger, and Brentley, his oldest son, was on the way. So the next morning after the murders, he was getting ready for work, and Frankie didn't show up. So he went over there. He saw Bobby Joe's car and a cop car, and initially he just thought Bobby Joe had gotten pulled over or something. So this poor kid walked into Frankie's house and into the bedroom, and he said he froze. He said he saw things he didn't want to see. He saw their bodies, knew immediately they were dead. He was beside the baby bed when he saw him. I believe they explained it. The baby bed's like on this side and then the bed's beside that. He heard a cop telling him to go outside. And he said at that time, he just couldn't move. And he kept looking at the bodies. And then the cop told him again to go outside. So he went outside to find Brentley, the 3-year-old at the time. At that point, Ruger was outside with and Emma, who was with Bobby Joe that morning, going house to house. Remember, you had that Billy, not bad Billy, but the other Billy, and Emma had went with Bobby Joe that morning to do the chores at Chris Sr.'s. And Judy and Leonard Manley were also there, which at that point was Frankie's grandparents. He learned later that others were dead. Once outside, he just stayed with Brentley. He called Chelsea, which is Frankie's ex, and Brentley's mom, and he just said he just doesn't remember what he told her. He was taken to the sheriff's office in a squad car to get interviewed, and his car stayed at Frankie's. After that, he went to the church with the rest of the family. They were congregating the family at that church just to have them all in a central location. He said he went to all the funerals except for Gary's because it was in Kentucky. They were held at the same time except for Hannah Hazel's. He did see Billy, Jake, and George at the Rhoden funerals. Ooh, y'all, there's a special place for these people. He voluntarily gave his DNA and his phone to BCI so they could extract that and rule him out. He was really close to Hannah Mae and little Chris as well. Hannah Mae stopped seeing Jake and expressed fear of all the Wagners. Now, that was an objection. The judge allows it. And he lists some of Frankie's best friends as well. And he said it was never his impression that Jake and George were best friends with Frankie. So on cross, again, Nash gets a little bit snippy and just condescending with Cody, who clearly is very nervous, very soft-spoken. They had to tell him several times to talk into the microphone. He's just a very quiet kid. So the defense says you found Frankie with Hannah Hazel at the residence Dana had moved out of. How long before? And he says, I don't know. Nash said you were asked by BCI agents if it appeared there was a struggle or something going on. Do you recall that? And he said, no, it's been 6 years. The defense says, do you recall telling BCI agents Frankie's house is always a mess? And he kind of laughs and he says, that's Frankie. And then Nash is like, do you recall saying that? And he said, yes. Regarding Hannah Mae, you had taken her to the Wagner home at her request. And he says, yes. Did you go more than once? And he said, only once. And then he asked, did you recall seeing George there when you were there? And he said, no. So the defense asked, you were asked how many times you saw George. And you said a few times, maybe at a fireworks show and a funeral. Does that account for the few times you saw George? Talking about the funeral. And Cody says, no. And the defense attorney says, can you give me locations? And he says, I don't recall. The defense says, you're not telling us Frankie and George didn't know each other, right? And Cody says, no, I'm not saying that. Defense says, you said you've lived on Union Hill Road all your life. I would assume you living there all your life, you frequented Chris Sr.'s house. And he said, all the time. The defense said, did Chris Sr. have a dog? And Cody answers, yeah, Chance. And the defense says, what kind of dog is he? And Cody's like, I don't know, his dog. How big was Chance? And Cody says, a regular sized dog. And so the defense says, could you approximate? And he kind of uses his hand. He says, like this tall. And the defense says the court reporter didn't see your hand. And the defense says, was there something different about Chance? Cody says, what do you mean? The defense says, well, was Chance a gentle dog? And he said, to me, yes. The defense says, you had been to that property often, right? Cody says, yes. Defense says, how was Chance with people he didn't know? And Cody says, well, these people wouldn't have gone in the house. And the defense says, so when I asked you what was so special about Chance, what is it that in regards to Chance about aggression? Do you recall telling BCI agents about Chance's aggression if someone was not known and approached the house? And he said, Cody says, I couldn't tell you. Defense says, you said you saw Jake and Billy at Chris Sr.'s, but not George. And Cody says, I said a couple of times. And the defense says, I asked you when you saw George, and Cody interrupted and said, yeah, and I answered you. You're confusing me. Way to go, Cody. Defense says, do you recall me asking when you saw George and where you've seen him? And at this point, Cody just looks frustrated. He's kind of looking to the side, almost to the judge, like, will you please stop this? And maybe he's just having a come to Jesus moment so he don't lose it. Either way, Cody did great with that. It was just condescending. It wasn't yelling or rude. It was just the tone and the way he presented those questions just come off very snooty. I just can't stand that when they do this to witnesses that are victims, living victims. The defense says, you saw him at the funeral? Yes. Defense says George didn't hang out at Chris Sr.'s, and he said, I saw him at the fireworks show. Defense says your testimony was you saw him a few times, right? And Cody says yes. Defense asked Frankie's hobbies. He enjoyed hunting. Here we go again, asking about the hunting. What kind? And Cody says squirrels, deer. Defense says nothing further. So on recross, Angela says, are you nervous? And did you express that to me before testifying today? And he says yes. Prosecutor says, who met with you in the conference room? And Cody says, you did. Prosecutor said, have I ever told you what to say in response to those questions? And Cody says no. Prosecutor says, you saw George Wagner a few times at Chris's fireworks show, and you knew him enough to recognize him, and you saw him at other places you can't recall but the funeral. You did. And he said yes. So at that point, he's asked to point George out and tell what he's wearing, and he does, and he looks right at him. The prosecutor said, you weren't with Frankie 24/7, so it's possible Frankie hung out with people you don't know. And he said, yes. Prosecutor said, when you were talking about his best friends, those you named, did you see them often at Frankie's house? And Cody says, yes. Prosecutor said, you didn't see George at Frankie's? And Cody says, no. So I don't know. I think maybe the defense is going to try to say that George and Frankie were buddies and he would never be a part of anything that would hurt Frankie, but good try. All right. So next up, Kendra Rhoden. She was so sweet, y'all. I love her. And you know, you think about it. We know Hannah May had texted her really most of the night before she was murdered. She also texted Jake, but these girls were like sisters, and you can tell that she's missing her cousin very, very much. She says she's nervous about testifying, and her parents are Stacy Rigsby and her dad is Kenneth Rhoden, who we know was murdered by these monsters. She has an older sister, two brothers, one of which has passed away. And then her brother Luke actually testified last week in the trial, and she's the baby of the family. So her folks divorced when she was in middle school. So Kenneth moved in with his parents after the divorce, which was right next to Chris Sr.'s house. And she said her parents remained friends after the divorce. She said that Kenneth was actively involved in all of their lives, and her and Hannah May would go stay at Kenneth's a lot. Sometimes Kendra would stay for weeks with her dad, and he was actually helping her pay for a nursing career so she wouldn't have to take out student loans. And at the time of his murder, he had saved $12,000 to help pay for it. She did get her nursing degree, and I'm sure that just like wherever her dad is, I know he's proud. He also helped her siblings anytime they needed anything. Saw him at least once a week as she got older and busier with life, but she said her and Hannah May were like sisters from early childhood. They were only born a month apart, so they were raised side by side. Sometimes they would stay at their grandparents' house with their dad, or they would spend the night at Chris or Dana's. And as her and Hannah May got older, she knew Hannah May had started dating Jake, and she knew Jake personally, had met him on multiple occasions. She said Hannah May was 13 when she started seeing Jake. It's 2 years older than my youngest, y'all. I would be in jail. She met Jake after they started dating. Kendra met Jake after they started dating, and she first met Jake when Jake, George, and Billy had come to Chris Sr.'s to help him with something. And it's weird because you think about it. You think about all the things these families did together when things were okay-ish, you know. They were going to each other's houses. They were coming to parties, like 4th of July parties, and then something like custody where, you know, none of this ended well for the victims or the kids. because now Sophia will, never know her mom or her dad, really. I think one of the plea deals that Jake got, if I remember correctly, is he did get to have like a FaceTime with Sophia. I think that was one of the conditions. But Kendra spent time with Jake and Hannah Mae. They went to the Scioto Fair and some kind of a deer tail festival. And they also hung out some at the Bethel Hill house. Hannah Mae tried actually to hook Kendra up with George, but she said neither were interested. Kendra dodged a bullet there. I mean, I don't mean that in any kind of nefarious way, but Kendra told Hannah Mae she didn't like Jake and because he was controlling and followed them wherever they went. She wasn't allowed to be alone. She said they went to a deer festival and her and Hannah would say, "Hey, we're going to run to the bathroom." And Jake would walk them to the bathroom and wait outside. That would drive me nuts. That would drive me crazy. At the Scioto Fair, he made a very demeaning remark to Hannah Mae and grabbed her by the arm. So Kendra kicked him in the shin. Good job, Kendra. I'd have aimed a little higher. But Hannah Mae got in the middle of them, and she said around this point, they're 14. She told Hannah Mae that she did not like Jake, and Hannah Mae thought she needed to get to know him better. But Jake didn't want Hannah Mae around Kendra. So eventually, she stopped hanging out with him. And she said Jake was the one that separated them. So she knew that Hannah Mae got pregnant with Sophia, and she had come to her and arranged a day for them to be together. So a man-made pond that her family made, they went there and she told her she was pregnant, and Kendra thought maybe she was joking, but Hannah Mae said she really was and everything would be okay. She tried to support Hannah Mae during the pregnancy, but she really wasn't allowed to be around Hannah Mae because Jake didn't allow it. After Sophia's birth, she moved in with Jake on Peterson Road, maybe at Bethel Hill. She wasn't sure, but she wasn't allowed to be. I'm sorry. She stayed at Bethel Hill for long periods of time, and then the Bethel Hill home burned down. She didn't visit Hannah Mae when they moved to that Peterson address, and at some point, Hannah Mae left Jake, so she came to Kendra's mom's house where Kendra was staying. And Hannah Mae was really upset, and she played some recordings of phone calls that she had recorded with Jake or recordings she made in person about things that had happened between them, like him admitting to hitting her, choking her, pushing her against a wall. When Hannah Mae left Jake, of course, we know she already had Sophia. And so Kendra... Let's see here. I'm sorry. Kendra told, sorry, y'all, I just got a message. Kendra saw a mark under Hannah Mae's chin, and she never moved back in with him after that. She was with Hannah Mae during conversations with Jake after they split. Hannah Mae would put that phone on like speaker so she could hear and be a witness to anything that was said. And they were still living at this point where Frankie and Hannah Hazel were living when they were murdered. Hannah Mae had the phone on speaker, and this was after Hannah Mae had found out she was pregnant with her second child, Kylie. And Jake was just convinced this baby was his, so they were trying to point out how the baby wasn't. And Hannah Mae was just telling Jake, you can't be a part of this child's life. She also heard a conversation after she left Jake, and before she got, she also heard a conversation after she left Jake, but before she got pregnant with her second child, Kylie, Jake told Hannah Mae if she wanted to continue being Sophia's mother, she had to stay with him, and if she left, she would be leaving Sophia too. Hannah Mae expressed fears of the Wagners, the whole family, after she left Jake. And so there was, like I said, there was constant objections by the defense. I'm just not going to get into those because they're very repetitive, but they did not want this stuff coming in for some reason, even though it really doesn't reflect on George. I mean, other than the fact that she feared the whole Wagner family, which included George, but she wasn't sure how long Hannah Mae had been seeing Charlie Gilley before she got pregnant. And she left him because, number one, he didn't want to commit, and he also had an addiction to pain pills. So she started dating Corey Holdren, and she knew she was pregnant when they started dating, and so did Corey. And she dated him from the time she left Charlie up until her murder. Corey also used pain pills, and Hannah Mae helped him to get off and go through withdrawals, and he got clean with her help. Kendra said at this point, after she left Jake, they were back to being like sisters again, spending more time together, and every time they had a chance, they were just nonstop hanging out. At the time, Kendra and her boyfriend would spend time with Hannah Mae and Corey. So Corey was willing to parent Kylie, even though it was not his biological child. He was 100% all in, committed to Hannah Mae and that baby. She saw Kylie the day after Kylie was born at the hospital. That would have been 4 days before Hannah Mae was murdered. And she said Jake was still convinced Kylie was his child. So on the day before the murders, the 21st, she hung out with Hannah Mae, Corey, and her boyfriend at the time. They went fishing and stayed for a couple of hours and left when it started getting dark. Corey's sister and his sister's wife watched the baby while they went fishing. So they were going to stay the night at Hannah Mae's. Kendra and her boyfriend were going to stay the night at Hannah Mae's with her boyfriend and Corey. Her boyfriend got a toothache, and she got a message asking if she could watch some friends' kids. And they were supposed to go sleep over at Hannah Mae's after she got finished, but she ended up having the kids all night until 7 a.m. And talk about a twist of fate or stroke of luck or whatever you want to call it. She left there and went to her mom's house, and she went home and fell asleep. So her boyfriend woke her up around 8:30 that morning, and they'd missed a call from a family friend saying she heard over police radio that Chris Sr. had been shot. And so they called this person back. She tried to call Hannah Mae. They drove to Union Hill, and they were stopped by police just right before they got to Frankie's driveway. At some point, her brother Luke had heard from police that Hannah Mae was shot and was dead. They tried to push past authorities to get closer, and a family member, she said, was actually arrested there for trying to get past authorities, which, come on, just, yeah. At some point, most of the family ended up gathering there, and Corey came a little bit later. They were told to go to that Union Hill church, and later that night, they briefed the family on what they knew. So once at the church, they told her about Hannah Hazel, Frankie, and Lil Chris. And she tried to call her dad, Kenneth. And she said she called before she got to the church. He wasn't answering, and that's because they assumed he was at work. And he would answer calls and texts on his lunch break. But the lunch break came and went, and they didn't hear from him. So Luke and Donald, who have already testified in the trial, went over to Kenneth, as we know, found him deceased, murdered. Her aunt got a text later. The reception was very poor, and screamed out that her dad was dead too. After hearing that her dad was dead, she walked down the hill, and a family friend picked her up, and she said she just wanted to be close to Hannah Mae, to be with her. She fell to the ground, and she said her friend helped her back up and took her back to the church. And so she said if Kenneth left his house, he would lock it, but he did not have an active lock on the inside of the trailer. So if he was inside at home, the trailer was not locked. So, excuse me, if he didn't feel like there was a reason to lock his door. This is, a very isolated area where they all are. And I'm sure that something like this is just never even imagined that somebody's going to come in your house. And not only that, they have dogs and guns. So at your own risk, it's just, we know what this family planned. Kenneth did own weapons, and he actually slept with a gun and had one in his truck. He had a dog named Brownie who would stay outside when Kenneth wasn't home. When Kenneth was home, he would be inside. She talks about the alarm that we've heard about at the end of his driveway. If someone crossed that path in a car walking, it would go off. She said normally he would leave around 4 a.m., as we know, to go to Chris Sr.'s to take a shower for work. He was working up in Cincinnati. And as with Luke, she said that Kenneth was a light sleeper without taking his blood pressure meds, but he was a much heavier sleeper if he had taken it. He had multiple trail cameras on his property, and the cameras would send alerts to his phone, and sometimes he would send her pictures of deer or different animals that came on those trail cams. She was aware that he had a marijuana grow op, and she said he liked to brag about it. And there was a couple of times she bought some for herself and her boyfriend at the time. Kenneth did not approve of her using marijuana, so she would have to tell her dad it was for her boyfriend. Remember, nobody except for Gary had anything in their system. Nothing except caffeine. She wasn't involved at all in the grow op. Frankie and Hannah Hazel locked their doors because of Ruger. And also, Hannah Hazel was paranoid after she found out that Chris Sr. was growing marijuana next door. Chris Sr. didn't lock his door at all. She knew he had cameras on his property. And at Dana's new residence, she wasn't sure if they had cameras, but she said that Dana and Hannah Mae both would lock the doors if they were inside the house or gone. They were very particular about having those doors locked. So she went to the funeral for the Rhodens, and she saw Billy, George, and Jake there. She did speak with Jake briefly at that funeral, and she had been around the Wagner family several times. Per her observation, the Wagners would decide things together as a whole, and they were nonstop together. She knew about the custody dispute, and that came from Hannah Mae. And she knew Chris Sr. had been trying to get a good lawyer in case this ended up in court. And this was before Hannah Mae gave birth to Kylie. If you guys remember, they said that once they found out she was pregnant with Kylie, they kind of dropped the getting a lawyer stuff. So when Hannah Mae was pregnant with Kylie, Kendra heard a phone conversation between Jake and Hannah Mae. And he told her he didn't want Sophia around Corey. And if she allowed Sophia to be around Corey, he would take Sophia away from her. So Kendra gave BCI her phone for extraction. She said she saves all her texts and emails. I do the same thing. I have like 5 phones laying around here, but some of them have like voicemails from my grandpa or my aunt on them, and now my uncle. And so I get that. She knew Chris Sr. also grew marijuana. Chris talked about it and would go in the garage area to conduct business with people, including Billy Wagner. This was prior to Sophia being born. She said that Chris Sr. and Billy would go by the garage, and Chris would send them inside the house while they did business. He didn't allow them to be out there at all. She knew that Jake set up the crib for Hannah Mae just before Kylie was born, and after they moved into the new house. We know she had tried to get him to bring it prior to the move, but he didn't bring it. Chris Sr. was hurt by someone named Rick. We know he was hit with the 2x4 and he was hospitalized. Hannah Mae stayed with him in the hospital and also when he got home. Kenneth visited Rick after this incident, and I think we know visit might mean he kicked some tail, because that was one of the reasons, as we know, Kenneth was murdered. They were afraid he would retaliate. Chris and Frankie both had guns. Frankie kept the shotgun by his bedroom door, and Dana had a handgun. Kendra told BCI agents that Kenneth was protective of his entire family. She went hunting with Hannah Mae and Chris Sr., little Chris, and her dad. They went to the festival with Jake and George, where there was a bow shooting contest, and George, Jake, Billy, and Hannah Mae participated. After the murder, she tried to maintain contact with Jake to check in on Sophia. She was allowed to see Sophia one time. Her and her sister went to Peterson Road and saw Bulvine and Sophia, which is Bulvine, I think that's how you say it, is George's son with Tabitha. They stayed outside. Angela was inside, but she said Angela lingered around to keep an eye on everything. That was the only time she was allowed to see Sophia. And Jake texted her after the homicides, and he was upset. The last day she spent with Hannah Mae, Jake had Sophia. And she said there was a text he was offering to keep Sophia a couple of extra days so she could recover from giving birth. We all know it's because he didn't want his own daughter there when he murdered her mother. On cross-exam, again, Nash. There's a word that rides with Nash, but we won't go there. You were asked about the routine of Dana locking the doors. What was your answer? And she said they were locked at all times. Defense says if they were asleep, they would be locked. And she said yes. He says, you said you saw the kids at Peterson and George wasn't there. She says, no. Defense says, you said you cooperated with BCI agents. You gave information about Big Mike from Cincinnati. And she says, yes. Defense says, you were asked about drug dealings with your family. Are you aware of Big Mike's race? Did you ever observe an African-American male with Chris Sr. and Kenneth? So your information would have been hearsay. And she says, yes. The defense says, do you know where Big Bear Lake was? And was there a time when Chris Sr. was there talking to Robin, a family friend? And she says, yes. The defense says that conversation dealt with drug trafficking, and then there's an objection by the prosecution. And then he asks, do you have knowledge of Chris Sr. buying a building for a pill mill? I guess it's a building where you make pills. And she said no. The defense says, do you remember providing that information? And she said, I provided it based on hearsay. I was like, boom, girl, you go, girl. Throw it right back at him. Because they kept objecting to hearsay about the conversations with Jake and Hannah Mae. And so I provided it based on hearsay. In other words, you can't question me about it anymore. Kendra, you rock, girl. The defense says you were asked about Billy and Chris and said they were business associates. And she says yes. You were asked about dogs, and your dad had a dog named Brownie. Brownie was aggressive against people he didn't know, and she said yes. Chris Sr. had a dog named Chance, and she says yes. The defense says it was aggressive to people he didn't know. She says yes. So I think where he's going with these dogs is he's going to use it to say George was not inside Chris or Kenneth's residence at the time of the murders, but we kind of already know that. We know that Jake and George hid underneath the truck at Chris Sr.'s. And it seems, I mean, we don't know for sure, but it seems like maybe Billy went to, or maybe killed Kenneth because it was the same caliber bullet. They could have been on a lookout or something, but Brownie, Kenneth's dog would have been inside, according to Tabitha, if it was at nighttime anyway. So I don't know where they're going with that. The defense says you knew Chris Sr. was trafficking marijuana and other trafficking. And she said yes to marijuana, but no firsthand knowledge of any other substances. The defense says you told BCI about other substances. And again, she just kind of said, just what I heard. So that was it. The next witness, bless his heart, Corey Holdren. This poor kid, you can still see the absolute raw devastation on all these witnesses for sure. I'm going to tell you right now, this kid loved Hannah Mae. And I think he loved that baby. And I don't think he'll ever get over it. He was tearful. He cried on the stand. And major props to these members of the family today for allowing themselves to be recorded to show this side of them crying on a world stage, because they're just showing they love these people. So Corey knew Hannah Mae through Kendra. Actually, she had introduced them. They started dating. And Hannah Mae learned a week after they began dating that she was pregnant. So he said they broke up for a while because of that. But Hannah Mae posted on Facebook that she had been in that car accident. And when he saw that, he was worried, reached out to her, and they ended up back together. He knew she was pregnant, but he was just worried about her. And he said he knew the baby wasn't his. But he said their relationship was great. He said, we were in love. She was the best thing that ever happened to me. We never fought. She helped me through things like depression. He said, I didn't have that when I was with her. He said he was an addict with pain pills, and Hannah Mae stood by him through the withdrawals, and nobody does that unless you truly love someone. He said he committed to Hannah Mae to raise Kylie as his own. Charlie said it wasn't his baby, and he didn't want any part of that baby's life. And Corey said he was dying for a family, and he told him he would take care of her. He went to all of Hannah Mae's doctor's appointments with her, and he named her Kylie Mae. He was the one that picked out that name. He was with her when she gave birth, and he cut the umbilical cord, and he was the first one to hold her. Jake brought Sophia to meet his new sister, and he did acknowledge he looked different with black hair. So you think at this point, Hannah Mae's in the hospital having just given birth. Jake has dyed his hair black already. There's a picture I've seen of Sophia holding Kylie. It's a really sweet picture. I didn't see Jake in it. He said that he held her like Riley was his kid, and he just thought it was his kid. He made a comment about her toe, which was a Wagner trait. I think it's like a hammer toe. And so I remember hearing that he removed her little tiny sock to look at the toe to see if maybe that would be a clue the baby was his. And he did make a comment about that toe. Corey said that Hannah Mae was a great mom to Sophia. He said, I never saw her raise her voice at her. He said she was rotten, but she never yelled or spanked her. And he said, I wish Kylie could have seen that or experienced that. Hannah Mae lived in Frankie's trailer when they first started dating before they moved. And he would spend the night at the new house many times. He was in the process of remodeling a home his mother had given him so that they could move in. And they were painting Kylie's room, and Hannah Mae was planning to move in with him when all this was finished. And I think, you look at the custody motive, and then you look at this very serious and maybe to Jake seeing a genuine relationship where it's not based out of fear and it's based out of a love that's visible. I think those two things might have really been what set him over the edge. So the day before the murders on the 21st, he spent the entire day with Hannah Mae. He was fishing, and his sister was watching baby Kylie. And Hannah Mae was just ready to get out of the house after being pregnant and having the baby just for a little break. And they were gone for a couple of hours. And he smiled as he talked about this. He said Hannah Mae caught a big catfish. And he said she was a redneck. And he said he took a picture. She had no shoes on, and she had a big fish in her hand, and she also liked to hunt. So after fishing, he planned to stay at his house, and Hannah Mae was going to get her breast pumped because she was nursing the baby. And his mom called and said his sister's water bill was super high, and they were worried she had a leak. And they begged him to fix it. And he said normally he would not have went over there that night. Hannah Mae said she would get her breast pump and then just come back over and stay with him. So she went home and texted that she was just super tired and would stay there and see him in the morning. Their last text was the both of them saying how much they loved each other. Had his mom not called, he would have been with her. And he says he doesn't know why he went to his sister's. He just can't explain it. The next morning, he got up around 8 and went to his sister's, and his sister's wife took him to get things to fix that leak. He kept seeing helicopters and cops passing by really quickly. And at first, he didn't think anything about it. But when they pulled in the business, Kendra called and said that he needed to get there. And Kendra just said, they're gone. And he didn't know what she meant. So they got to Union Hill Road right by Frankie's, and then they were stopped by police. Hannah Mae's grandma told him that Hannah Mae was dead. And he said he froze. He didn't feel a thing. He didn't understand what was going on. He doesn't remember much other than sitting on the grass, and cops backed them up further down that road, and they ended up at the church with the rest of the family. He said he didn't stay there long. They were trying to call little Chris because they didn't know where he was at the time. He said Hannah Mae had been working at the nursing home, that she was a hard worker and a good mom. And then he said a great mom. He met Jake at Sophia's second birthday party at a firehouse. He said he didn't stay long because it was his family and her family. And he didn't really meet the Wagners, but he saw Jake, and all the guys were by their trucks. He went inside, and Hannah Mae made him eat something, and he left early so he wouldn't cause any drama. He just didn't want any drama at this kid's party. And Hannah Mae said Jake would keep her in the bedroom for long periods of time locked up. They wouldn't let her see her family. He was just so controlling. He did say hello to Jake at the party, and another time besides the birth, Jake called and was mad at Hannah Mae because she was late getting Sophia to him. And he wanted to come to Corey's because he wanted his daughter. So he knocked on Corey's door, and Corey invited him in and sat on the couch. This was about a week before those murders. And he stayed maybe 45 minutes. He said they talked a bit. He was there because Hannah Mae wasn't where he wanted her to be. And the whole time that he's talking about inviting Jake in and sitting on the couch, it's like he's just shaking his head like, I can't believe I did that. It's There's a lot of stuff haunting this poor boy. He thinks he saw Jake at the church the day of the murders. He thought Hannah Mae would come out and it would be a prank. He said he still feels that way to this day, but it's just not what it is. He also gave BCI, DNA, and a cell phone. The defense didn't cross him, and that's probably a good thing. He was very quiet, very to the point, and just very emotional. He shed tears. The last witness of the day was Frankie's ex, Chelsea, the mother of his child, Brentley. She opted out, so I want to give a big, big thank you to Big E, Chasing Paper 89 on Twitter for the notes. He sits in and shoots me the notes of the witnesses that opt out, and it helps me tell you guys what's up. So go give Big E a follow if you're on Twitter. It's at Chasing Paper 89. So what's amazing is now Brentley is 10 years old. She was 16 when she started dating Frankie, and he was a year younger at 15. They were together off and on for about 5 years. Her mom was not a fan of the relationship. She did get pregnant with Brentley 6 months after dating, and she said Frankie was a really good dad. She said her and Frankie would deer and raccoon hunt together. She knew he had the chickens for fighting, and she knew the Wagners. They had been coyote hunting with Tabitha, which is George's ex-wife, and George. And they'd also been deer hunting with Jake, George, and Billy. After George and Tabitha divorced, Frankie and Chris Sr. told her to quit hanging out with the Wagners. She said this was back around 2013. She said the Wagners were nice to her except for Jake. He was super controlling, and she acknowledges they were a very close-knit family, always together. And she said anytime at their house they were together, it was like a family meeting. So about a year after Sophia's birth, around 2014, when Hannah Mae was living with the Wagners, Jake was very verbally abusive to Hannah Mae. And Hannah Mae called her one night from Jake's cell phone, very upset, and she was talking super fast, didn't have much time to talk, and told her not to call back, but said that Jake was threatening to chop her legs off to keep her from leaving that house. So there's a sidebar, according to Eric, with a very heated discussion between the parties. They talk about Angela going after George's ex, Tabitha, with a shotgun and said the boys followed her. We know they followed her to that gas station. She stayed on the property that night until it got dark and then took a bike to the gas station. If you remember, they talked about that, where Angela or Billy said whoever calls the police first kind of has the advantage. So George called and made that domestic violence claim against her. She said Jake would threaten to chop off Hannah Mae's legs if anyone called her, and Chelsea called or texted Chris Sr. to tell him about this call with Hannah Mae, what Jake said he was going to do. And Chris said, thanks for letting him know, which unfortunately got Hannah Mae mad at her for telling her dad, because she wanted to tell her dad about this, but at a different time. And unfortunately, their friendship ended around 2014 or 2015. After the breakup, Frankie didn't go around the Wagners anymore either. Chelsea and Frankie had a good relationship after they broke up. And the night before the murders, Chelsea had asked Frankie to watch Brentley because there was some sickness going on around the daycare. So she dropped Brentley off around 9:30, and Frankie wasn't there yet. If you remember, I think he had done a grocery store run maybe. So she stayed and talked to Hannah Hazel for about an hour. She said Frankie got back, made some sausage. She left around 10:15 or 10:30. And the next morning, she kept getting calls from Cody Manley, and she answered the third call, which the timing to this is interesting because we got 10:15, 10:30. So you're looking at 20, 30 minutes at most before Chris Sr. and Gary are murdered. So you would think, Frankie was awake, because we know he took a picture, I think, right before midnight of the boys sleeping. So she thought Cody was joking about what he was telling her and told him to have his mom call her if it was true. Chelsea and her mom went to Union Hill Road, and when they got there around 8:44 a.m., Brentley was playing in the front yard. EMS took Ruger, and they went to the church. Law enforcement was supposed to interview Brentley, who, remember, was 3 at the time, but ultimately Child Protective Services interviewed Brentley at Children's Hospital. Chelsea stayed at her sister's that night. Jake texted her and asked if she knew what was going on and told her they needed to keep the kids close, like as family. He texted her again and they set up a play date for that following Friday. The good thing is, and I think this is what I caught, Brentley doesn't remember anything from that night or remember seeing anything. He also said, or she also said, Jake blamed her for not having his back on social media forums when they were making that move to Alaska. So apparently the rumor mill is in full control and he got ticked off she wasn't making excuses. As a result of him being upset with her about that, she contacted BCI to let them know the Wagners were moving to Alaska. That communication with Jake was in April of 2017. And before cross-exam, the judge took the prosecution and the defense into chambers with a court reporter. And the meeting was about the phone call made to Chelsea from Hannah Mae. And the judge explains that can't be used to cast any shadow of character issues about the Wagners. So that ended court for the day. She will be cross-examined on Monday. And let's just hope that Nash is calms down this weekend, because it's just so hard to watch these people that are already suffering get kind of jerked around by the defense. I know they have a job to do, but you can do your job with class and tact and with sympathy for what this family's been through. Such a pet peeve of mine. All right, guys, tomorrow I'm probably going to do a little update. Pryor, if you follow the Vallow Daybell case, Pryor filed today. Never thought I'd say this, but high five to Pryor. He wants things to be televised. And also there were some updates about Debbie Collier. They gave a press conference today. Not a ton revealed, but it was revealed she was sitting in that car 10 minutes in that Family Dollar before she drove off. What was going on? And I think while she was sitting in that parking lot, the Venmo was sent to her daughter. So I may update that tomorrow. But in the meantime, you guys have a good rest of your Friday, and we'll see you soon.